right? Yeah.
Having a bit of a bad cocaine.
I wanted to start off with a quote from someone you don't often hear in the debate about Scottish independence. Victor Hugo, the author of Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But I'm not going to burst into song, I'm going to leave that to Pat later on. Victor Hugo was a Frenchman, of course. He was a humanitarian, a social reformer, a free thinker. And he said, you can resist an invading army, but you can't resist an idea whose time has come. And I think that's what we are experiencing here in Scotland right now, an idea whose time has come. It's taken a long time, but we're almost there. Ideas and movements all start from small beginnings. And the people who advance them can sometimes be laughed at and isolated and even persecuted, but if they stick to their belief and it makes sense and it's spread and it's the right idea, it's absolutely unstoppable. Now, independence for Scotland is not a new idea. Scotland was an independent country for hundreds of years. It's a nation that emerged in 843, which makes it older than the United States, older than Germany, Italy, Canada, New Zealand. We were an independent country for 900 years before the incorporation into the union with England, which has lasted 300 years. So we should take our longevity as strength, and we should also ask, if these younger countries can survive and prosper, why can't Scotland? And perhaps more pertinently, in the context of the current debate, if smaller countries than Scotland can survive and prosper, why can't we? I'm thinking of Switzerland, New Zealand, Finland, Denmark. Now these countries don't have Scotland's natural resources. They don't have Scotland's wealth. Scotland is a very, very wealthy country. It's the 14th richest country in the world, according to the OECD. And yet, for many years, we've been told that we're subsidised by the rest of the UK. And it's only very recently, in the past few years, that we've actually got the official figures from the Office of National Statistics that shows us that it's not the case. Now, UKIP are a party that's standing somewhere down south, but standing in Scotland as well. In Scotland, their chairman was a rather strange guy, an aristocrat called Christopher Moulton, who was a journalist on the London Evening Standard while I was working as a journalist here. And he wrote a piece for the Evening Standard back in the early 1990s saying that Scotland was subsidy junkies. And that spawned a whole debate, and people just took it for granted that this was true. Scotland was living off the rest of the UK. In fact, the official figures that we have now, verified by the Office of National Statistics, show that for the past 33 years, Scotland's given more to the UK Treasury per head than we've got back. And if you just take the last 5 years, that surplus amounts to £12.6 billion, which is £2,400 per head for every man, woman and child in Scotland. Think about what we could have done with that money. Scotland has natural resources, as well as, obviously we know about our energy reserves, our oil and gas, our renewable energy, but we've also got other products that these other small countries that are wealthier than Scotland don't have. Like, we invented golf, the world's most popular game after football, and we have got so many, 4 or 5 universities in the top 200 that all punch above their weight and attract a lot of investment into the country. In fact, Scottish universities create more spin-off companies per head of population than any other university in the UK. So we've got a lot of soft power that helps us exert influence in the world, and you've got to ask yourself, John outlined the levels of poverty in this country. You know, why aren't we doing better? Why aren't we benefiting from that wealth? Because at the last count, 870,000 people in Scotland were living in poverty. A large number of them were people who are in work, and a large number were children, and I think that's an absolute disgrace. I think that these other countries, which are much more prosperous than Scotland, are in the driving seat of their own destiny. That is why they're doing better. We don't make the big decisions about our future. We don't control our national wealth or how to spend it. We're given a cut each year based on what Westminster government decides to spend. And in the rhetoric around this debate, you'll often hear Westminster politicians saying, but you've got all this money and you can decide exactly how you want to spend it on health and education. You've got that freedom in your parliament. And it's certainly true that we've managed to keep education-free tuition levels in universities, and we've stopped the privatisation of the NHS. But when it comes to the money to fund these services, it's entirely based on what the UK government decides that they're going to spend on the services down south. So they're gradually privatising the NHS down south. That reduces the amount of public money that's going into the NHS down south. And because our cut is calculated on that, it's going to get smaller and smaller every year. So we're already coping with really, really big cuts, but you ain't seen nothing yet. And that's one of the reasons why we really need independence just now. One of the things that's very enjoyable about this debate is that it's taken over social media. And one of my favourite internet memes is this one: bring our government home. And it's, who do you want to decide the government of Scotland? If you see the top, Scotland's a third of the UK landmass, and it has 59 MPs. And this tiny southeast triangle of England is what is it, about 50th of the UK landmass, and it's got 139 MPs. So basically, we are completely outnumbered. We don't exert power in our own country. Yet we're not a region, we are a nation. Yet we have absolutely no power. And the only way to reverse that imbalance is to transfer the power away from the little triangle in the southeast to Scotland. I don't believe the people who tell you that the best option is more power for the Scottish Parliament. I realise that the idea of having a parliament with more power is very appealing to people. They want to take things in stages. And that's why the party I represent, the SNP, was quite happy to have a third question on the ballot paper that gave the Scottish Parliament powers that would help create jobs, powers over welfare that would stop things like the bedroom tax. We were relaxed about that, even though our preference is independence. But the unionist parties, Labour, the Tories and the Liberal Democrats, all got together to say no, there isn't going to be a third question on the ballot paper. So when they turn round and say, but we're going to give you more powers to the Scottish Parliament, they had that option. They've had the option for a long time to increase the powers to the Scottish Parliament, and they've not come up with very much. Now Labour is one of those parties that has actually unveiled what they want to do in the event of a no vote. And their devolution commission leaves 80% of the taxes of Scotland still going to the London Treasury. So we control just 20%, a very small 20%. We don't get our oil revenues, we don't get our whisky revenues, we don't have control over business taxes so that we would be able to create jobs and boost particular sectors. And they also leave control over welfare and pensions with the UK. The UK has the lowest state pension in Europe. I think Hungary has a better state pension than we do. And that's just an absolute disgrace. So I think you'll hear a lot in the pages of the newspapers going forward about all these extra powers, that a strong parliament within the UK if you vote no. It's just not going to happen. 80% of those taxes are going to continue to go south. Now it's said time and again that independence in itself won't change the lives of people, and that's true. In Scotland it's what you do with the powers of independence that will make a difference, and that's why the SNP government published Scotland's Future, which is their vision for the starting point after we vote yes. Now, it might not be everyone's vision, it might not be John's vision, you might want to go further, but it is a starting point and it is a vision, because the other side have not outlined what Scotland's future is going to be. Although we do know that we're going to have £100 billion spent on Trident, we do know there's another £25 billion of welfare cuts coming. And we do know that if we vote no, there's a very good chance that Scotland will get an additional cut of £4 billion to its budget. So there are certainties if you vote no as well as yes. Now the vision that we have basically takes Scotland's strengths and looks at how we can build on those strengths if we were in the driving seat of our own destiny. And we do have very many strengths. Financial services in Scotland is extremely strong. It contributes 4.8 billion to the UK economy. Creative industries, 4.8 billion. Renewables, we've got 25% of Europe's tidal resource and 25% of its offshore wind resource. Our life science employs 32,500 people. Oil and gas I've already mentioned, those reserves are worth 1.5 trillion. Food and drink actually contributes to a quarter of the UK's food and drink exports. That's 5.4 billion, and tourism 6.2 billion. And we've still got a manufacturing sector that's worth up to 1.1 billion, and the universities that I mentioned. Now, with independence, we've got the opportunity to grow our economy. And just to give one example, a 1% increase in Scotland's economic activity rate is the equivalent to an extra 30,000 people in the labour market. And attracting and holding on to skilled workers could help our projected population growth of 9% over 25 years. And that's important because every European country has an ageing population. So the ones that will do best in terms of supporting our ageing population are the ones that have a thriving working age population and that can maintain the size of that working age population and have them contribute the taxes that pay the pensions for the older people. So we could also target tax measures that could offset the pool of London in the southeast, and that could create about 27,000 jobs. Just boosting our brand recognition. I said earlier Scotland has a lot of soft power. Within the UK, our brand isn't pushed, and there's huge amounts of goodwill out there for Scotland. If we were pushing our brand and we increased our exports by 50%, that would be another 100,000 jobs. John has already mentioned our plans to transform childcare, and I've just got some figures here. An increase in the number of women in work of 2%, which would take us above the rate in the Netherlands, could boost tax revenues by 200 million. And if female activity reached Swedish levels, an increase of participation of 6%, tax revenues could increase by 700 million. The other thing about investing in early years is it's great getting more women into the labour market, if indeed that's what women want to do, but given the levels of inequality that John described that have become endemic over the years, one way that you can help reverse that and address it is if you invest in high quality early years childcare. Because a child that's grown up in poverty, by the time they get to school, they're 1 year behind a child from a wealthier background, and it's really, really difficult to bridge that gap. And there's been a lot of research done, places like Harvard, that shows that children who have very high quality early years education from an early age will have better relationships, they'll be more confident, they're more likely to go into higher education, they're less likely to fall into crime or unemployment. Obviously, these are generalisations, we're talking about statistical variations, but it's certainly true that investing in childcare, they say that for every pound that you invest, you'll get £9 back in the way of the economic growth going forward. So that's our big vision for Scotland's future. You might have a different vision, but the fact is that unless we control our own future, our vision is not the one that's going to be put into play. It's going to be George Osborne's vision, or a watered down version of George Osborne's vision, maybe by Ed Balls, who says he's going to replicate the Tory spending plans, although it seems extremely unlikely that we'll get another Labour government according to the polls. And the other thing about the inequality in this country is that it persisted. It really started with Margaret Thatcher in terms of the gap between rich and poor, but it kept growing throughout 13 years of Labour Westminster government. So I feel that Westminster's had its turn, and now it's our turn, and that's why I want you to vote yes on September 18th. Thanks very much.